Are you struggling to create an intentional headspace? Unable to connect deeper with yourself? Come, and together, let's address the elephant in the room. I'm your host, Sinead Roche, and this is the Uncomfortable Podcast. I don't like the question of who are you? I've had this multiple times, like in different psychology courses, or even when you're filling out freaking like forms of like so that you can get your interests more narrowed down, or even for freaking dating sites, I feel like they do that. But I don't like that question because it's very, very difficult for me to answer because I think there's just so many different parts of me. And, I've answered that question in the past in a very different way that I'm answering it now. And sometimes it just doesn't feel like I know me. I don't know who I am. And it's also really weird because like, even if we take it outside of like, answering that question, you ever ask your friends where it's just like, yeah, what do you say to people like about me? And from different friends, I'll hear different things. And as nice as that is, it's also really conflicting because it's just like, that's how you see me? I don't even see myself like that. Wow, okay. That's how you see me? Like, damn, okay, ouch. Didn't know that was the case. Yeah, I just don't like that question sometimes. And I don't think I'll be liking it for the next 10 years, or actually next 20 years. Because it has a lot to do with identity. It has a lot to do with what you think of yourself, which is definitely influenced by what other people think of you and what current trends there are, like how you're supposed to be. Your past version in comparison to your present version in comparison to the person you want to be in the future. It's just really confusing. It's overwhelming, overstimulating, and it's just like, what if I don't have the answer for you? Like, and you're just sitting there and you're just like slumped, and I'm just like, well, damn, I don't know who I am. And that's why today I want to talk about identity, knowing who you are, why that's going to be so confusing throughout your 20s. I would also say 30s, like from the way I've heard it from other people in my life. I don't think 40s, but maybe the next 20 years or so, like I think it's just going to be really confusing to be in that space. I'm going to talk about that. I want to talk about how that's going to be changing. Whew. And there's that word I don't like. We've said it before, I really don't like change that much, but I'm trying to get better at it and trying to reframe my mindset to think of it as a positive thing. But anyways, so what is identity, first of all? Identity is basically who you are, what your actions are, like, and that is defined by like your memories, experiences, relationships, and values. And that helps you to create your sense of self. And I noted down that like I've seen it from multiple like different places where it's like, it's who you are and what you believe in, but it's also what your actions are and what that depicts of you. So it's your actions, and it's also, I guess, like in a sense, like your belief about yourself, like who you are, and knowing your sense of self is really important, and we're going to get into that. But there's so many different things to take into consideration. And I wanted to introduce the concept of intersectionality within this. And intersectionality, it usually refers to the interconnectedness of social categories such as race, gender, class, sexuality, and ability, and many other different things. But you can also take that outside of that context of, like race or gender. It could also just like go into like the interconnectedness of even like your different affiliations that you're a part of. So even like if you're a part of like a sports group, how does that define you while also being like a gym goer or something like that? Like what different communities are you also a part of? And maybe I'm kind of messing it up in the sense of, trying to connect intersectionality to also belonging to these different groups. But all I'm trying to say is that you're parts of also different social standings and also just different groups in general, which also feed into you how your memories are made, what experiences you've had, what events are you taking part of in comparison to like other people. So everything is curating you and who you are. And I know that as we experience more things, we become different, we adapt a lot, we like find new things about ourselves out, and I think that can get really confusing when people ask you like who you are, and when you ask yourself like who am I. And I know I go through some days where it's just like, I can tell you right now exactly who I am, and then there's other days where I'm just like, I don't know, like whatever you want. Like I don't really care like right now. Like it's just too much. It's too much of an answer. And I know this can seem like really shitty. Like this is so, how do I say this? This is like the least of my concerns, but like knowing who you are and knowing your identity does play such an important role as to like your goals, who you're surrounding yourself with, like if you like yourself, all of these different things. And the fact that it's changing so rapidly and constantly, I think, especially through your 20s, at least from what I've seen within this first year of being 20, or like, I guess even the past 3 years or so. I think one thing I've also noted, like, I just seen that it's changing a lot, and that's really hard sometimes to process and can potentially lead to identity crises. And those are like the times in your life marked a lot by experimentation, where sometimes you might even be willing to experiment a lot. But it also just like includes like a lot of change, conflicting or newly even emerging values. And it's sometimes also like a time where just like you're not committed to who you were in the past. And I know it's very hard from personal experience, because I know some past versions of me, or like some different parts of me that don't necessarily exist now, could handle some of the current situations I'm in a lot better. And vice versa. Like I know right now, like I'm also really grateful for some of the aspects of me that I didn't have before. But yeah, so I think in your 20s you go through identity crises, and I think you'll even go through that while you're older. I don't really know from firsthand experience, but right now I know that it's personally, sometimes really hard to understand, like, who am I? And it's really hard to understand that, especially when you're going through those transitioning periods, in the sense that there's like new things being introduced to you, or you're introducing yourself to new things. And it's just like, even when you're in those in those situations where it's like, you would have done something completely different. Like the past version of me, I think I'd have gone off on people. Like I think I've crashed out multiple times and like had temper tantrums, even in like small situations. And now this version of me is just like, I don't really care that much. I don't really care that much. And that's a great feeling. Like I would say that specific example, but it can also be really hard when, again, like you might miss certain parts of yourself. And that's why I also think it's like really important to date yourself continuously throughout, by getting to know yourself, by going through different experiences and being like, okay, I don't like this. Okay, I actually do like this a lot. And I think though what makes it really hard is that, especially in your 20s, you're not really away from the social pressures yet. I think as you come to find out that no one has a clue what they're doing, then it gets easier. But I think initially, we came from high school, we came from middle school, we came from like just wanting to conform to others and be like others and be a part of something that wasn't necessarily weird. Like transitioning from that period to like now a period of like experimentation is also just really difficult, and getting away from people's like, what they think of it. That's really hard. And that's why I want to put a preface on this and say that, first of all, your identity is for you. Your identity is for you. You are the only person at the end of the day, regardless if you have a spouse or you're in a relationship or something like this, like you have a cat or a dog. At the end of the day, you are coming home to yourself. You need to like you, because if you don't like you, you gotta ask yourself sometimes then, like, okay, why would other people then like you? Or like, and that's also, okay, you don't have to ask yourself that necessarily, but it's just about you liking you, wanting to enjoy time with yourself, because I mean, you're with yourself 24/7. So in that sense, what other people care like and think about you for like 5 minutes, it doesn't really compare to what you think of yourself for your entire life, right? And one thing that I've noticed is that obviously different people will bring out different parts of yourself, and in that sense, I would say like go to the people where like those parts of you that you love about yourself and like the favorite parts of yourself, like they're being brought the most. Go to like those energizing places. Because I mean, you'll be happiest there. Like, why would you want to go to around people where you're just noticing like, negative aspects of yourself come out a lot? And when those negative aspects are coming out, like, and they are part of your identity and part of your behaviors, and your attitudes about yourself and your personality, like, just shying away from them does not mean that they don't exist anymore. Like, shying away from those people and shying away from those environments doesn't mean they don't exist anymore. I think at that point, it's really important to dig deeper into, why do those parts of me exist? Like, what is it about this? Because if you avoid the part altogether, you're also neglecting a part of yourself that probably comes from a lot of different traumas. And so I think it's important, obviously, to surround yourself around, like, and be in environments and experiment in places like where you feel so comfortable. But when you see yourself also having like these negative reactions, ask yourself why. What's happening? Like, what about this within me is conflicting? And sometimes it will just be a surface level thing of like, I don't like this. Like, this just isn't me. And other times it's just like something down the line went wrong or something happened. And that's why I've mentioned this before. Like, it's really important also who you're surrounding yourself with. And then one thing I also want you guys to take in consideration, like, as you're exploring your identity, is that don't judge yourself too much. Like, do not judge yourself too much, because there might be things that, like, you don't even know you love doing them, or like love being around certain, aspects and environments, because you're just like, man, but I've heard from this person, like, all these pre-notions of what it is like, and you haven't even experienced it yet. You don't know, like, if this is going to be something that brings you so much joy. So I would say take part in as many things. I mean, that's what your 20s are for, experimenting. If you have like that privilege of being able to do so, take part in those different spaces where you haven't like been before. Like, if you're curious about them, hopefully they're legal, but take part in them, see what comes about it. Like, because I think it would really be a shame to just live life and not really know yourself truly, and not see different parts of yourself like come around. Like, I think that would be a shame, because you're missing out on so many things about you. And I think that's like the great part about you. Like, how like you want to experience other people and experience like, what they're like in these situations and stuff like that. The same way like goes for you. Like, experience what you're like in these situations. Experience like if that's something that interests you, But yes, it's going to be very confusing and very conflicting sometimes, because maybe some of the things you're doing now is just like, it doesn't relate to who you were in the past. And sometimes it also doesn't even relate to who you want to be in the future, which is when I would say like reassess what that would mean for you, and what you want to prioritize. Because there's some people who want to prioritize like being happy over like, I guess, money. Okay, maybe this is not the best example. But also just prioritize like what type of person you want to be in that sense, like what's most important to you at that time. Because if you have to sacrifice some things, like, because you have all these goals and stuff, if that's what like part of your identity is about, like, and that's what you want it to be about, that can be very different comparison to someone whose main priority is being happy. I think that's what I wanted to say with the money part. Now, let's get to why is this important. I've mentioned the fact that it's important to know the different parts of yourself, and also to know like what your favorite parts are of yourself, in order to understand like your sense of self, your personal characteristics, what do you like, what don't you like, what are maybe some, I guess, things you have to work on, and where are your strengths in that sense. And with that said, when we know ourselves, we're also, and again, I think if you're on this podcast, you're here to grow, here to do better, like in some quote unquote better, do in some aspect, right? Then when you know yourself, you can also refine and adjust what goals you set for yourself. And it does have that thing to do with like what you want for yourself in the future, or like who are you currently. When you're able to understand yourself and be more aware of yourself, then it's also easier to set goals for yourself. because you know exactly, like, pinpointing, hey, like, this is not working out, or hey, maybe I need to readjust my mindset on that. So even though, like, it's really conflicting and confusing to go through, like, you know, finding yourself and that identity, like, those changes, it's so important, especially if you're really just, like, you want to be present and very aware of how you're growing and how you're developing. So that's why, like, even even when I have those days where it's just like, I don't really know who I am, like, those are the days I still continue to explore, like, myself in that sense. And then I kind of just, like, sometimes I'll be like, this really doesn't align with my goals, like, because this part of me makes me really happy, but, like, might conflict with my goals in some aspect or whatever. And I'll be like, okay, maybe we can change this a bit. Like, maybe can we refine this? And there's also days where I'm just like, oh, I'm exploring different parts. And I'm just like, I did not know this existed. Wow, insane. Because this is not something I was like before. This is not the person who I was before. Yeah. That's why it's important to know. But how do we overcome juggling all of them? Like, juggling all that different aspects of your identity. I think it's important that you allow space for all of them. And I think, even the thing with people having like different friendship groups, right? It's just like you go to different spaces where it's just like, oh, I get to experience that point of myself. I get to be here with this part of myself. And even, like I said, even the negative aspects, just like I get to understand them and I get to evolve from them, because I'm allowing space for them and because I'm not in denial that they do exist. Like, I've talked about my anger so much that I can guarantee you that is a part of my identity right now. Like, right now, it is a part of my identity, but, like, because I'm addressing it, not denying it, like, I'm able to understand it more. And I think I'm also able to understand, like, what are healthier ways to move with it. But that's also an emotion in that sense. And I think that what's also something that's also really important, I've mentioned this, is just don't look towards other for the approval of your identity. Like, try to limit as much, like, outside influence when it comes to your identity as well. This is your own journey. I've mentioned that on multiple things where it's just like sometimes you can't take people along with you. And sometimes I'm finding yourself like you can't take people along with you. Like, you're gonna definitely find places where it's like you have a community there. But that's not always going to be the case. And so, again, you're coming home to yourself 24/7. It's not someone else. And obviously, because this is going to take your entire life practically I wouldn't say entire life, because, I look at my parents and I'm like, they look secure in who they are. It looks like they know themselves. But I think it's also because they've experienced so many different situations where it's refined them and it's molded them into the people who they are, like, and they know where they're at their happiest, and they know where also, like, I guess, where also some of their weaknesses lie. Like, I think after you have a good amount of experiences, so this doesn't even have to be with time, but I think it does take time. But once you have that, it's just, you'll be able to understand yourself on a deeper level, and maybe then it will become a solidified identity. I don't know. I'm not there yet. But I've definitely seen the difference between a person who knows who they are and a person who doesn't. And right now, we're probably definitely wandering around trying to figure that out and trying to get away from different versions of ourselves. But that's not a bad thing, because at least we're wandering around with direction in some sense, to find ourselves, rather than just wandering around completely and being like, it is what it is, and like in all these episodes and all these lessons, like I still struggle with this, and I'm going to be struggling with this for a while now. But I especially struggle with coming to terms with who I am when I'm going through this transitioning periods, and new things are happening, and I start to develop different values, and I'm just like, oh wow, this is not something that I had before. Like, for example, my sensitivity now. I'm a very sensitive person, I've realized. I think that's a lot to do with insecurities, but also just feeling a lot. I feel a lot. And that's really, sometimes it can be kind of exhausting, because it's just I remember who I was in the past. But at the same time, I know how much it's helped me, like, to understand a lot of different parts of myself. Some might say I'm too emotional, but who really cares? You know, I kind of like that aspect of myself, but it's also really hard to navigate different situations because now you have to account for this part of yourself. And I mean, that's what happens to us when we go through different experiences, though. Like, we change. But I think definitely another thing that's like really hard for me is still trying to get away from external people, like, and their, I guess, what they want from me and my identity. Because it's like that thing where you, like, imagine if you've moved from, like, your hometown to a different place and you go back to the hometown, like, people still have that version of you in their heads, but now you're a different person. And sometimes it's really hard to get away from that pressure of just, like, falling back into rhythm, like, to try to be that person again. So I still have a hard time doing that as well, trying to just, like, stick it out, even though it's a bit confusing. But that's okay. Because as long as I get back up and get back to finding myself, like, and yes, it's gonna be ups and downs with the entire, I guess, the entirety of the journey, then it's worth it. Yeah. So I hope that with all this said, you understand that it is really important to understand who you are, that your identity does matter to yourself the most. And so that's why it should be your priority in understanding who you are. So you understand what goals to set for yourself and who you want to become and what are some aspects you maybe don't like about yourself, you know, and also understand that it's okay to be confused, because I think that's the entire, you know, not just your 20s or something, but that is a huge part of just, like, growing up. It's like you're confused, you don't know what to do. But knowing who you are and knowing your values, your beliefs, like what your actions show about yourself to yourself, that matters. All right. And now the question I want to ask you guys, and I want you guys to ask yourselves, right? With all this said, you know, I've talked about the fact that I don't really like change, but I have to also ask myself, like, am I comfortable with the idea of this person, like, who I am right now, changing? Like, am I flexible with it? Like, am I allowing myself to go with emotion and open myself up to becoming, like, a different version? And the reason why I ask this question to you guys is because change will happen inevitably, but, like, sometimes, like, we're so afraid of becoming a different version that we just don't learn the lessons that are being taught to us, which is what happens through experiences. Lessons are being taught to us. And some of us are very quick to avoid, you know, that letting us impact us, but that's what it's supposed to do. It's supposed to impact us, but, like, are we open to that? You know, and again, not every experience is going to be the one you don't want it to change you, obviously, but are you flexible with it? Are you welcoming the changes? Hopefully the positive ones, obviously, but are you open to it is the question. Thank you guys so much for listening to this week's episode. Hey guys, thank you so much for supporting this week's episode of The Uncomfortable Podcast. Make sure to tune in every Monday for a new episode on Spotify and YouTube, and go check out our TikTok and Instagram for more content.